Prior to the COVID-19 pandemic, U.S. consumers spent more than half of their food dollar on what the U.S. Department of Agriculture calls food away from home. In other words, on food consumed at restaurants and other food service establishments. The pandemic flipped that pattern on its head, with spending on food away from home dropping by more than $32 billion between February and April of 2020. Welcome to Feedstuffs in Focus, our podcast taking a deeper look at big issues in the livestock, poultry, grain, and feed industries. I'm your host, Andy Vance. Thanks for joining us. This episode is sponsored by United Animal Health, a leader in animal health and nutrition. You can learn more about United Animal Health and how they are working to advance animal science worldwide by visiting the website unitedanh.com. In this episode, we talk with Hinda Mitchell, founder and president of Inspire PR Group, a practice in Columbus, Ohio focused on strategic communication, stakeholder engagement, crisis preparedness, and response and issues management. Many of Hinda's clients are national restaurant companies, food manufacturers, and agricultural commodity groups, giving her an in-depth perspective on the food service segment generally and its relationship to the entire animal protein value chain. Hinda and I discuss the current state of affairs in the food service space, what's happening at restaurants, and some of the ongoing challenges they face, from ongoing restrictions in some states to a broader issue attracting and retaining a highly engaged labor force. And I think it's safe to say that pre-pandemic Americans loved eating out. I'm thinking about our own family's anecdote, but looking at USDA data, the amount of money we spend on food away from home versus food consumed at home, pretty striking disparity in food service had really taken a major chunk of the consumer's food dollar. The pandemic certainly has changed all that. Now, as we start to come out of it and people are vaccinated and maybe venturing out in the world, what's life like for your clients in the restaurant industry today? Are they the ones who are still in the business? Are they making it? Is it coming back, or are they still by and large suffering like we know they were in several months of the past year?
There's a lot of disparity. There's no question. I mean, we know that there are still a number of small and independent restaurants that didn't come back after the pandemic, may never come back after the pandemic. And that really is such a great loss. But, there are others that have weathered the storm better, and some that, actually had really, sort of fantastic experiences through the pandemic, if you can imagine that. And I think to go back to sort of how you started the conversation, people, when you think about where we all are today, it's the vaccines are sort of emboldening all of us to sort of venture back out into the world in a different way. We're starting to see some loosened restrictions as it relates to where people can be, how they can congregate, things like that. Curfews in some states lifted so that restaurants aren't in a position of having to close early. But people go to restaurants not just because of the ease of it, because I'm tired and I don't want to cook a meal, although that's also a thing. But people go to restaurants because those are places where we gather with friends and family. Those are places where we make memories, places where we have experiences. And, even as, you and I were talking about, getting out with your family is a special experience, especially if you haven't done it in more than a year. And so we are starting to really see some nice recovery in the restaurant sector. People are coming back out. The more people who get vaccinated, they feel more confident. Although, the vast majority of restaurants are still operating under pretty restrictive health and safety standards, and many are still have limited capacity or unlimited tables. The good news is the weather's getting nice. Folks will start to want to be outdoors on patios again, at least in the state where you and I are from, Ohio. Winter is not necessarily great patio season. So we're starting to see that recovery, that comeback. Although last year was really devastating for so many. I'm hearing from some of our clients and some of the folks that are in our circles that restaurants really are at 80 to 100% of year over year now. I mean, they're starting to see some pre-pandemic numbers in their restaurants, and that's terrific news. And certainly, as they can open patios and take in more capacity, then even under the restrictions, that's going to improve their ability to start really working toward that bottom line. Now, other sectors, fast casual food, pizza, A lot of those folks that were sort of really well built in for carry out, they were prepared for carry out orders, they were prepared for delivery. A lot of those sectors were able to quickly pivot. Where we saw, more impact certainly was on the fine dining space, the family restaurants that maybe didn't have a robust carry out or delivery mechanism in place, and they sort of really had to spend those first few months of pandemic figuring that out. Whereas, pizza, of course, pizza delivery is such a big thing, and they were really ready to roll and sort of were able to shift into the new model very quickly. We're optimistic, but also realistic that, if we've sort of hit the ceiling of those folks who are actively willing to get vaccinated, it's going to take a while, I think, until we really get to the point where we can lift a lot of these restrictions.
Well, I want to ask about that in specific. As you look at the customers, and you've had a lot of experience trying to figure out what makes customers' pulses beat and
Mhm.
so on. As you look at the people walking through the doors of your client establishments, what is it that's either driving them back to restaurants or conversely keeping them away from restaurants at this point? Will vaccination be the thing that kind of flips the switch there, or are people coming back, regardless of that, because hey, it's been a year and I'm ready to get out of my blankety blank house and
Right.
go and have a good time? What are some of the things there that you're watching
Mhm.
as kind of key indicators of whether or not we're back and ready to go and mingle at a restaurant again?
It's an interesting question, and I think everybody's different. Of course, some of the research that was conducted early in the pandemic, research that we also did, suggested that people were really leery of going out into restaurants, and people wanted those masking requirements, wanting those COVID restrictions. They were very worried about the possibility of getting sick from other customers inside a restaurant. But the good news is we know so much more. And Andy, as you know, I am not a public health expert, but I read a lot and I listen a lot. And, we know a lot more about this virus than we did back then. And while masking continues to be a priority, I think people are also coming to the realization that restaurants are safe places to be and that you can enjoy that restaurant experience in a way that is safe. And that's really important because ultimately, we can tell them over and over that we put these measures in place, right? That we're requiring masks, that we're distancing tables, that we have air purification systems, and we tell them all those things, and that makes them smarter. But they have to really believe in us, right? And they have to believe that the restaurants are committed to doing what's right. And in my experience, they really are, right? These are people who are in the service business, and so ultimately their first goal is to serve people. So I believe that it's a combination of the vaccine, also, as you said, of some winter cabin fever that, maybe we're all feeling a little more like living on the edge than we used to be because we just want out of our houses so badly. But I think it's also an acknowledgement that there are places that I can be and be safely. I mean, for example, and Andy, I know you have kids. A year ago, we thought that school transmission was going to be a huge thing. And now we have kids, we have all of our schools have the kids back in school every day. And so, I think we're starting as a society to realize that while we certainly have to be mindful and aware of the impact of COVID and the continuing risk from COVID, I think we also know a lot more about how to do it safely. And that's true at the restaurant level, but I think it's also true at the consumer level. I feel a lot more confident in general than I did 9 months ago, for example. And so I think from that perspective, there's going to continue to be an expectation that restaurants are following safety protocols, both because it's mandated, but also because it makes me feel more confident as a consumer. But in addition to that, I think that people just want that extra reassurance.
That leads me to something I've been wondering about. If I'm looking down the road, 6 months, 12 months, 18 months from now, you've talked about some of the changes in whether it's, kind of the capacity limits or spacing tables farther apart, which is very much the opposite of where we were going in some spaces, of trying to, optimize our density so you get the, best advantage out of your floor space and what you're paying for rent and so on. If I'm looking at some of the increased sanitation and safety measures, increased patio usage. You referenced that earlier. Of all
Mhm.
those different changes that we've seen in food service because of COVID, what are the ones you see, and maybe something that we haven't talked about yet? What are the things that you've seen that you think will stick with us for the long haul? What are some of the, maybe it's that increased focus on carry out? What are the changes that you've seen that are going to be part of the food service space for the long haul?
One of the things that I think has been a really interesting, and it's a small one, but an interesting development that I think is good for our friends who supply food to those restaurants is the advent of the family meal. And I'm sure you've experienced it too. So I could not only go get carry out, but I can actually get a meal that's been prepared for my entire family. So I can go get a pan of pasta instead of a single serving, or I can get, a pan of chicken fingers and a family size side of macaroni and cheese, or whatever it might be. And it's sort of like pseudo catering almost, right? We're serving, restaurants have gotten more of the ability to adapt to serving sort of family sized meals versus just single portions. And I think that is probably going to stick because I think that's worked really well as a strategy for a lot of restaurants. I do think carryout is here to stay. I think that those who embrace delivery have found it to be lucrative and will continue to do that in some form or another. And I think the other thing I think will continue is we will see heated patios. I believe that patios will continue to thrive, even in cooler months. We've learned how to do really special outdoor spaces, whether it's igloos or tents or just having, heated spaces. Patio, people love to be outdoors. And even in those cooler months, restaurants are finding ways to accommodate their guests on patios. And I think that's going to stick.
And maybe give some additional opportunities for restaurants to create more of that experience we were talking about. That's such a great part of going out to eat, so to speak, is the experience, separate from the actual product. So I could see some opportunities there to how we design our spaces and what we do with the space we already have. So that could be one of those win-wins. Maybe I'm an optimistic silver lining kind of guy. I do want to talk about one of the challenges I've seen, and some of this is anecdotal, and anecdote, pluralized, does not equal data. So I want to get that up
Mhm.
front. But I've observed a couple of different places myself, and collated some anecdotes from other friends and family, that there seems to be a challenge for our food service partners in the labor space. Are you seeing or hearing that from your customers and clients, that they're having a hard time staffing their restaurants now that things are opening back up, with some more vigor here in the spring?
Definitely. And like you, I'm not on the labor front, but I can tell you anecdotally, and just in sort of the industry pieces that I have reviewed, I know that labor and employment continues to be a big issue. The reality of the pandemic is that a lot of people left the industry. Restaurants closed or scaled back to very limited staffing, furloughed employees, really at restaurants of all size, right? Small restaurants to really large national, publicly held chains. Furloughs really happened across the board. And for many people, what they did was they shifted out of the restaurant and hospitality sector altogether and went to work, in manufacturing environments, went to work for Amazon. And so getting those people back into the hospitality sector is going to be a continued challenge. We have to, I think, as a restaurant industry, and by the way, you and I both know, labor has been an issue, in farming and food production too. So, this is not something that those folks are, not used to as well. But in the restaurant sector, I think that the onus is now on leaders in restaurants and the hospitality industry overall to create new excitement for those jobs and to remind people why those jobs are really special. And it isn't even just the pandemic impact, but the continuing impact of not having as many people in restaurants. If you're a tipped employee, not having as many people in your restaurant means you're probably not making as much in tips. And so as things open up, and as you and I were talking about earlier, the reality is that some restaurants are short on staff, and as things really open up, as those patios open up, which is a great thing, but we're going to have all that additional seating, which is going to mean even more labor needs. Restaurants are going to have to really upsell the value of those kinds of jobs and to remind people why they chose careers in hospitality. I mean, these folks are the talent, they're the front lines with our guests, and service depends on having a great team on the front lines, and so that certainly is a factor. But we are hearing filling open positions continues to be a factor, and these are folks who either shifted to other sectors. They're still feeling nervous perhaps about returning to work because of COVID. And maybe they're still, living on unemployment, living on stimulus checks to some degree, and maybe they're just not comfortable, going back to work yet because they're concerned about COVID. And so we, as a restaurant industry, have a lot to do, I think, from a public relations and communications level to really retain our current employees, to reinforce the great work that they're doing, and then to attract new people. And that's going to probably look like a lot of career mapping, helping people see that there are opportunities for advancement within our industry. It's going to mean perhaps more traditional benefit packages, and really a sort of a renewed effort on hiring. I mean, if you think about it, it's like taking an industry that was sort of at half life and bringing it back to full life, and that's sort of starting all over again in many ways.
And for people who have never worked in food service, I have the impression that it's a can be a very challenging occupation. Certainly, the way we pay, frontline wait staff is very, or service staff is very different from other jobs outside of the food service space, the tipped employees and so on. And so when I hear you talk about we may need to talk about our more traditional benefits packages, do you think the situation will necessitate or force the industry to take an overall hard look at how they've structured relationships with employees for the bulk of the modern era? Do you think it will push them into making some tough decisions about how we structure compensation, benefits, and so on?
It's hard to say, Andy. I think that may come with time. There's no question that attracting talent into restaurants, we're going to have to be innovative, but we've also got a great story to tell. We've got a great story to tell about careers. We have a great story to tell about flexibility. We have a great story to tell about culture and camaraderie. If you ever have worked in a food service environment, those people become your best friends, right? You're with them a lot, and so I think from that perspective, I think restaurant employers are already doing a lot to support their employees, and there's no question it's going to be competitive, and those who are going to succeed are going to be the ones who are innovative, who show what that career path looks like, and who remind people who perhaps were in the hospitality industry and left it why they were there in the first place, and enticing them back.
Really appreciate that perspective. I see so many parallels between labor challenges in the food service space and in the food production space. And goodness
Mhm.
knows, as you know from your experience working in both sectors, that as you put it, the labor issue has been one we've been talking about for quite a long time pre-pandemic, and this has maybe just highlighted some of those challenges and opportunities. So I really appreciate your perspective, Hendo, on this and
I
all
think
the
that's
issues we've covered.
Yeah, absolutely. And I just came across my email earlier today. Some data from the Department of Commerce said that sales at food service and drinking places, which I guess means bars, rose by 13.4% in March, and that's the largest jump since June of last year. Which I think, if you look at that June of last year, it doesn't take much of a leap to say that that sort of signals the impact that this warming weather has on getting people out and about. And so that's good news. And I think, I mentioned earlier, the impact of the stimulus checks. I mean, I think we put money into people's pockets too. And I think folks are ready to get out and spend it, and to do some things to really celebrate, right? I mean, this is, although we are a long way from the finish line, the vaccinations have given people a lot of hope. And I think that when you have hope and you have that sort of desire for celebration and, sort of the coming out of the shell, going to a place where you can enjoy great food, great beverages with people you enjoy, that's a pretty great way to do it. And so I think for those of us in agriculture, I think our restaurant partners have a lot to offer. And as we, as they grow, we grow, right? And that's really what it's all about.
My thanks to Hinda Mitchell of Inspire PR Group for an enlightening discussion. For the latest news on trends in food production and purchasing, including what's happening in the food service sector, subscribe to the Feedstuffs Daily e-newsletter, and be sure to visit our virtual community and events platform, Feedstuffs 365. It's part of your subscription to Feedstuffs and can be accessed via feedstuffs.com. This episode of Feedstuffs in Focus is sponsored by United Animal Health, a leader in animal health and nutrition. You can learn more about United Animal Health and how they're working to advance animal science worldwide by visiting their website, unitedanh.com. I'm Andy Vance, and you've been listening to Feedstuffs in Focus. Thanks for joining us today. If you want to hear more conversations about some of the big issues affecting the livestock, poultry, grain, and feed industries, subscribe to this podcast on your favorite platform, including Apple and Google, or you can always check out our website, feedstuffs.com, for future episodes. Until next time, have a great day, and thanks for listening.